All right. So, hi, my name's Pete Fein. I go by Pete Wears Pants on Twitter. I have this blog at website at iwearpants.org or i.wearpants.org. I don't actually tweet all that much, but good to have a Twitter account. I am an agent with a group called Telecomix. We are an ad hoc internet-based cluster of what most people seem to these days be calling hacktivists, though we have mixed feelings about that term. This is our cool logo. When you think of hacktivists, you probably think of Anonymous because they get a lot of media attention. But there's a long history of using computers and the internet in particular, and technology generally to facilitate communication and freedom. Everybody from Cult of the Dead Cow, the cypherpunk movement. And if you think of hacking hacktivism a little more broadly, you might throw groups in there like WikiLeaks or the Yes Men, kind of as more media hackers. Telecomix is in that broad tradition, though we have more of a cypher hippie twist. This is our homepage. And it describes us as a socio-cybernetic telecommunist cluster of internet and data-loving bots and people always striving to protect and improve the internet and defend the free flow of data. Telecomix, just like the internet, knows no borders, technological or territorial. We are mainly, so we're just kind of a network of friends. We're just a group of people. We hang out. There's no mailing address. We don't take any money at all. There's no bank account. There's no formal members. There's no leaders. You don't get a cool badge or anything like that. What we are is an IRC network, mainly. Can we play the hand game? Everybody put your hand up. Everybody come up, put your hand up. If you've never used IRC, put your hand down. Okay, that's awesome. It's like 3 times higher percentage than any room I've ever given this talk to before. If you've never used a network besides Freenode, put your hand down. Wow. Okay. If you're on IRC right now, don't put your hand up. Anybody run their own server? Wow. All right. Awesome. Sort of. Yours are Freenode one. Okay, that's cool. So Telecomix mainly is just this. Oh, this didn't work at all. IRCnet. It's on our homepage here, which I just lost. And we hang out on IRC, and I'd like to, and we do stuff. Most of what we have done in the last year and a half has earned us the label Tech Support for the Arab Spring. So we have been pretty actively involved in trying to keep the internet running throughout the Middle East, Egypt, Iran, Libya, Bahrain, and been very active in Syria for the last 9 months or so. I can give you a little tour. We offer people all sorts of different services. We have pads. This one is from a talk I did in Mozilla. We provide DNS, a whole bunch of kind of different tools to help people use the internet in cool and constructive ways. Largely, Telecomix is like kind of a place to hang out and play with technology. Kind of like Notacon or your local hackerspace, and to sort of help out your friends. The people who hang out here have really complementary skills. I'm good at talking, and other people are good at like Bash and Nmap, which I'm not. There's a wide variety of folks who we call ourselves agents, agents of Telecomix. Personally, I'm a Python programmer, is my background. And there are a lot of pen testers and network admins. But there's also university professors and pirates and politicians and punks and protesters, both in the States and overseas. We call ourselves internauts in the sense of an astronaut or an argonaut, kind of that we're explorers and adventurers. And yeah, the other term, oh, does this go down? No. Typo. we like is data lovers. It's going to work. It's another kind of one of our propaganda sites we put together. Yeah. Basically, the idea that sort of there should be free and open data and access to it on the internet. We think that's cool. Okay. I'm actually going to encourage people. Oh, hold on, I totally got out of order. Pick up this thing. So, sorry. One of the other best descriptions I've heard for what Telecomix is and what we do came from somebody who works on Tor, but more on the policy side, strangely enough. She described the Internet Emergency Response Plan as so. Get a bunch of technically competent people together. The emergency response plan looks something like get people who know what they're doing together in an IRC channel and get stuff done. But I'm not sure the political scientists are familiar with that much competence in the same place. I was actually at a conference at Yale Law School, maybe about 2 weeks ago, where there were a bunch of lawyers and political scientists, and I don't think they got it. But maybe you guys do, and so that's what I'm hoping for. Because we're hackers, right? I've traveled all over the world in the last year and a half to talk about the work we've done, and trying to explain how stuff actually works in an IRC network, like organizing a conference or a software project, to people who have never worked in that way, where kind of people just show up and you just kind of do stuff, is remarkably hard. I think we get it. I hope we get it. But yeah. I use the word hack here in its original technical sense. We've talked a lot about different things that it means. But for me, it just means a clever technical trick or using a system in a way its designer didn't intend. In a lot of ways, for me, it's like a mindset. How the heck does this thing work, and what else can I do with it? And there's a level of adaptability that kind of comes along with that. I was out riding my bike once, and some part broke, and so I fixed it with a stick. That kind of attitude towards the world, I think, really captures what it means to be a hacker. All right, I'm just going to kind of move on and talk about more interesting stuff here. Telecomix hacks all sorts of things. Where did I lose this? Sorry. We don't just hack we hack in what I think is the constructive sense. So we don't DDoS servers, we don't leak emails, we don't deface websites. We try to be, I think, more kind of the flip side of that coin, of making stuff and building stuff and doing stuff. And we do that not to just help people overthrow repressive governments, but in all sorts of different places. We hack policy and we hack the media by getting them to pay attention to us. And pay attention to the stories that we hear. I was originally going to ask people, we have all, to treat sort of this entire talk as kind of a collaborative hack. That we have all this cool technology right in front of us, laptops and cell phones and stuff. And so if I don't actually have anything in particular, I don't really have slides. But if folks want to either tweet or log on our IRC server, it's irc.telecomix.org. There's a Notacon channel. And if you just have questions too, you just want to ask or comments or whatever, and I'm just going to tell some stories about what the heck I've been up to during that time. Sound good? Okay. If you also want to read your email or look at porn or kittens, I'll totally understand. All right. I got involved in Telecomix on about January 23rd. So about 2 or 3 days before the start of the Egyptian revolution. there was some pretty active filtering to the Egyptian internet during that time. We would help people set up VPNs just out of machines hosted in people's apartments or machines under their control. A lot of our guys are European, a lot of Swedes in particular. There's much higher internet speeds at home, and so they're able to run services like that in a way that we kind of can't really do in the States. We would get folks from Egypt on our IRC network who couldn't access Twitter themselves because it was blocked. And we would take reports from them about what was happening in their neighborhood or just how they're feeling about stuff, and we would tweet on their behalf. So that's the kind of facilitation that we try to do. Telecomix is not just people. There's a real humans and machines here. That it's not just about setting up a Tor bridge and then telling somebody to have a nice day. It's sort of about helping folks to kind of actively use that. And I think this kind of Twitter facilitation really captures that nicely. And so I don't know if folks have seen this graph board. This is a traffic graph coming out of Egypt. And you can basically see at some point on, I don't know, it's like the morning of the 28th, they just pull the plug. They pull the plug. They didn't actually physically cut the fiber because that would be expensive and incredibly fucking stupid. But they went to the ISPs and said, turn it off. Just turn it off. And that was really a shock even to us. I mean, we were in the thick of it. But to think that a country would completely cut itself off from the global communications network as much as it was able to was really kind of unprecedented. And it was like, what the fuck? What the fuck do we do now? We went back to some old 1980s technology. We used dial-up modems. We put together about 500 dial-up modem lines across the world. European ISPs and individual users, we wrote a how-to and kind of spammed that out for people to dial up and get some internet access. About 60% of Egyptian users were on dial-up before the revolution anyway. It's about 20% Wi-Fi, 20% wired, 60%. So that hardware is already there. The other thing we did is we sent fax spam. We Googled up the phone numbers of fax machines and copy shops and universities and hospitals and sent a fax with messages of support and communications advice and practical stuff like treatments for tear gas to all of these fax machines that we could find just using free internet faxing services. We know the tear gas stuff worked particularly well. More cool things. We had a ham radio operation. That got up to about 130 people in that channel alone. That didn't actually succeed. We didn't actually make contact with anybody on the ground in Egypt. We can talk about more about why people care about ham. Yeah, sure. Yeah, there were probably about 130, 140 licensed hams in all of Egypt. Most of those were probably ex-military. There's 83 million people in the country. There's 2 million licensed hams worldwide. Just chatting with people, the best guess of folks with regular access to equipment is probably 50,000, maybe 100,000 people. So it's kind of a for folks who don't know, it's a technology that with a 200-watt transmitter, which is what you have in your home stereo, you can cover a quarter of the globe. So we were trying to listen for Egypt from the east coast of the United States. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just coordinating. So a lot of what I do is just coordinating people and getting people to work together. So I'm not actually a ham. I just was hanging out and somebody said, hey, should we try ham radio? And I just kind of have an intellectual interest in pirate radio and such things. And so I just kind of ran around the internet and found people who wanted to help. I ran over the ham radio channel on Freenode. There's one or two other ones on some other Star Chat, I think. I don't remember exactly. I spammed forums and just tried to recruit people and then kind of say like, okay, like what do we actually need to do here? Some cool project ideas. Oh, that was the other thing. Is like I totally forgot. Project ideas came out of this. Like some folks were talking about making a ham to Twitter gateway. So while in some sense the project was a failure in that we didn't make contact with anybody in Egypt, just in terms of breathing some life back into that community and kind of opening up some new debates about the involvement and kind of political stuff, did come out of it. More cool projects, just because, I don't know, it's fun to talk like about the geeky stuff a little bit that I don't usually get to. We ran a project after, at this point, like January 28th, January 29th, to the guys like nmap the entire Egyptian IP address space in about 36 hours. If you think about how long it would normally take to nmap a whole country, it's like a few weeks, right? Because it's a lot of IPs. But there were so few machines up, they found about 5,000 of them, that it only took a handful of hours. We found like printers and like 1 or 2 cameras. What we did with this is they wrote some scripts to inject human-readable messages into the web server logs. So we do something like get, we are Telecomix, get, we come from the internet, get, we come in peace, like get, dial up, phone number like 12345, whatever. How much of those actually got received? I don't know. It's hard to tell sometimes. Like you spam things like that, and you can't tell what gets pickup. But it's cool. Like I think that's what I sometimes don't get to talk about. It's just this kind of, as a geek and a hacker, like how technologically fun this stuff can be. Like, just this attitude of like, oh shit, they broke the whole fucking internet for this country. Like, can we fix it? All right. Anybody using IRC at all? I totally forgot about it. Some folks. Okay, that's cool. So the world moved on, right? Egypt ended, the world moved on. Since then, though, we have been super busy in Syria. Sorry. We started our Syria operations July of last year. We started doing network scans. We had root on a box and a ground contact inside 3 days from when we started that. That's like less time than it's taken some conferences to buy me fucking plane tickets. Like for a system in which nobody's actually in charge, nobody's giving orders, like we're remarkably fast and we're remarkably effective, and like we're all volunteers, nobody gets paid. Like if you just flake out in the middle, like, that sucks, but like there's nobody gonna come and yell at you or anything like that. Like we get a remarkable amount of stuff done. We run a couple of sites to sort of, here, let me pop up, to kind of the news that we see. So we have Syrians on our IRC network every day on a regular basis. Some of these guys we've been working with for 6 months. We have no idea who they are. We don't want to know. That's part of the way in which we keep people safe. So this is our Syria channel. It's probably going to be pretty quiet. I talked about Telecomix being this cluster of humans and machines. II is this bot that does translation for us. So we'll get people come who mainly speak Arabic into this IRC channel, and we have some human agents who are capable of translating either through French or people who speak French. A lot of folks there too. But the bot helps too. We've come up with a couple of different sites, and it's sort of been a struggle to kind of get the news that we receive through these channels like out to the world. Right? That's kind of what we want to do to facilitate communication. We've set up a few interviews with the mainstream press. It's been difficult. The European press is a little better, but the US press in particular wants real names, insists on real names. Like, I could give them somebody in Detroit on a Skype connection who speaks Arabic and tell them they're in Syria, and they won't know. But you talk to these people, and some of them will actually, generally not Skype, but will use IRC or have email accounts. Some people will use Skype for 10 minutes, and you know they're in Syria. And we won't tell you where, we won't tell you their name. But I don't know, I guess that's journalists for you. So we run this news site. And so this is, again, accessible from the bot, and this is kind of, we just tweet out news about what happens, everything from network connections to news from the ground about protests and stuff like that. The guys also built yeah. Really slow. Somebody downloading like lots of movies or something right now? No. All right, let's try. Find something interesting. Okay. Oh wow, that's interesting. So like all sorts of stuff that we kind of put out, like here's some document from the Syrian government detailing all the specs of their internet backbone. That sounds cool. All sorts of stuff we find. The hands-on work will involve helping people set up with Tor, VPNs, other kinds of encryption, PGP, OTR for instant messenger chat. What? We do use ITP a little bit too. We'll run some darknets internally. So like that pad I showed you earlier is a collaborative editor. Some of the guys threw together a darknet kind of that has some services for, a kind of more handful of trusted Syrian. I don't actually know what's up in that much. Like nobody consults with me. They just go do things, and if I happen to notice and it's cool, like I come talk about it. But there's a lot of stuff that goes on that I don't know about. And that's part of I guess our OPSEC. That if we have a Syrian who's new and shows up and he needs a VPN, we don't discuss that in a public channel, right? Like with like 30 or 50 people. You remember like back in the day, like, when you would go cyber, you wouldn't like do that in a public channel. Like you go with like, 2 or 3 buddies and set up a VPN in a private channel. And so everything is on a very much a need to know basis. Because this channel is totally public. We get journalists, we get lurkers, we know it's logged. We get people who are occasionally curious about who we are and where we're from. We're pretty sure those are Syrian government agents. And so just kind of, when we get somebody we want to help out, we get them set up technologically and kind of give them an intro to OPSEC and then kind of bring them back in. And we want them to participate. Let's see if this came up at all. No. Everything's broken. What is that? I have this nice site I would like to show you. What the? Sorry. All right, I don't know why it's not working. Let's try it one more place. One of the projects we put together is a collection of videos. There's about 500 of them. It's 6 or 7 gigs at this point of stuff that's passed through this channel. Here we go. This originally started just as a listing on an Apache directory. This is everything. This is basically stuff that we have helped people publish or people have brought to our attention. And there's a really nice site called Syrian Stories, which seems to be down right now. We partnered with some journalists to kind of help give this a little better. Should we watch stuff? Should we find stuff that's not horrible? No, let's skip it. See what else I had here I want to talk about. Oh, you guys will love this. We'll be more proactive sometimes. This is a page that we used in, we've done it once or twice, but the first time was last September, this past September. We hijacked a significant portion of the traffic coming out of Syria. And so somebody would try to access google.com or facebook.com, and they would instead get this page. Which was a message about surveillance, and then a link to some tools about how to actually get around that. So last July, we started doing some network scans. We kind of started picking up on getting a sense of sort of what the heck was going on in terms of network surveillance there. And then trying to proactively provide tools to people to keep themselves safe. So that kind of hijack, that's a hack, but that's really a different use for those sort of skills than man in the middle or just defacing a website. That we're really able to use this to help people not get arrested and hit in the head. Okay. All right. One of the other things we discovered with lots of nmapping, anybody heard of Blue Coat? Does name ring any bells? Blue Coat is a company that makes deep packet inspection hardware. And we found about a dozen of their machines in Syria. Just on Nmap scans, we found some open FTP servers. And over the course of 6 weeks on these totally public FTP servers, didn't even need to guess a password, logs out of these things. And so these are basically they're capable of doing, what we found were HTTP logs, which was probably about 90% of the traffic they're seeing. But they're wire speed devices running, they run at the speed of the fiber using a custom ASIC to do deep packet inspection. The manufacturer claims that they're able to tell the difference between updates to your Facebook wall and Farmville. And then not just outright block Farmville, but slow it down. Because that way, as an employee in your company, you just won't want to play. You'd get pissed off if they blocked it outright. But if it's just slow, you go, okay, fine, you go back to your job. It's a fairly sophisticated technical distinction. We found the HTTP logs out of these things. So basically, these are enhanced Apache logs. So the source IP, the destination IP, URLs, what URL people are trying to get, host name, stuff like that. For all of the all of the ISPs in the country. We poked around with these for a while, and then guys eventually released it. I found out about it on IRC 5 minutes before it got leaked on Twitter, because again, people just nobody told me. But I wrote a story about it on Slashdot, and the company denied it. They outright denied that there was any evidence that this was their hardware, that there was any evidence these machines were in Syria. We're line 2 of the header says Blue Coat. Stop bullshitting us. What eventually happened was a couple of the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal picked up the story, and it turned out the machines were phoning home. That they phoned home not only to Blue Coat's headquarters, not only for software updates, but for collaborative filtering. So if they saw some weird traffic passing over the wire that they couldn't analyze locally, they'd send a sample of it home, and within 200 or 500 milliseconds, Blue Coat's cluster back at HQ, which is pooling this weird traffic globally, would try to give it some sort of categorization. That's creepy enough, right? That there's and there's a lot of these things out there, that this company is sniffing and sort of pooling interesting traffic across the globe. But yeah, when you then sort of use it in Syria to really restrict, we found that proxy was being blocked as a keyword, Israel was being blocked as a keyword, a whole range of sites, about 10% of Facebook pages, but not entirely Facebook.com. There was a period where you could browse YouTube, but you couldn't upload. And there's kind of all these kind of sort of fine-grained settings that kind of these devices are capable of. The company actually eventually admitted that this was their hardware. They also said that they weren't looking at their own logs, which I can believe, right? So these devices phone home, and presumably they keep internal logs of who's getting their patches and using their collaborative services. And they just claim that they weren't looking at all. Now, as I can believe that, like, as what's, probably, like, both just as sort of, like, lazy system administrators, but also they have a real incentive not to. Because this kind of equipment, like, causes huge media outcry. Like, they have an incentive not to know where this kind of censorship and surveillance gear goes, because it's really bad press for them when it winds up in Syria. The upshot of all of this, aside from the fact that they, got publicly shamed, was the EU passed export controls on this type of equipment to Syria in particular. And so some of the Telecomix guys, like I said, work on the policy side, or kind of more politicians. Like, a lot of our guys are European and they work in the European Parliament. He worked on some of that too. And so this is kind of really, I think, Telecomix at its best. Like, all the way from Nmap scans through kind of getting the media to pay attention through it by writing a Slashdot story at first, to actual policy change, like to actual real world change. This is kind of the cool stuff that, like, we can do as hackers to make our world better. And that, I think, in some ways, is a lot of it about what Telecom is about. Let's see, what else I've got on. Anybody have questions about DPI? No? Yeah. Okay. Get to that. At like the infrastructure level, I think it's probably a little late for that. I don't know if people saw, like, the NSA is building this huge data center in Utah to, like, store all of the internet traffic. Like, and stuff like it. Telecom's attitude here, like, we work on the policy side. Like, personally, I'm not interested in mainstream politics at all. But I don't think we trust governments, like, to respect our rights, to privacy, to not survey all of our communications, to not block websites for whatever stupid reason du jour they come up with. And so one of the things we do is we build tools. Telecomix runs cryptoanarchy.org. There's a big wiki of kind of tools and tactics and how-tos on creating autonomous zones, basically carving out space using strong cryptography where kind of we can be free from government censorship and surveillance. The other way other thing that kind of came out of Syria that sort of relates to your question is this project we have called Blue Cabinet, which is a collection of docs, basically. Pick some interesting ones. On, I think it's like 200 or 300 different companies that make software and censorship hardware and surveillance gear. It's like this huge list, and and this is the one on Checkpoint, and there's like dozens of companies. Just as a way of sort of starting to get a handle on who the heck is out there and who's actually selling this and what this gear is capable of. And so this is a public wiki. Our wiki's at rerebuild.telecom. I'll get to all those things at the end. I think the next lead, this is actually a decent lead into the other thing Telecomix was involved in. We blocked out our site like SOPA. I think the SOPA protests was a start of the internet starting to exercise its muscle a little bit in defense of itself. Like, this wasn't like the internet, we've seen the internet rallying up for like particular causes, like save this cat or, don't pollute this river, but we haven't really seen it like quite to this degree, like rally up in self-defense of the, it's kind of cool. So we weren't super involved in the SOPA protests, but we were pretty active for ACTA. People know what ACTA is. It's this big copyright treaty in Europe, and there are these enormous protests, like these huge, huge protests. Find some good pictures here. Oh yeah, this one's awesome. And so Telecomix kind of served as this like global back channel for the ACTA protests. This is some photos from Stockholm. So we had a channel of about 20 or 30 people. About half of them were Polish, because Poland is awesome. We can talk about more about why, because that's where the ACTA protests kind of really kicked off. With folks from Polish NGOs, weird hacktivists hiding out in their internet fortresses in Chicago, like me, European-level NGOs, French, all kind of a range of different people. Some people more on the like public interest group, policy side, where we basically just kind of hung out and sort of coordinated strategy and kind of chatted. It was really quiet, actually, most of the time, because we were all so busy. But this is like, when I talk about Telecomix as a network of friends, like it's all these people who are like really into the internet and like making an awesome internet. And like, so yeah, like it's sort of a natural place for that kind of low level but sort of important organization to go on. And like, again, like there's no like, this is not like a central secret committee. It's just an IRC channel. And it's even a public channel. You just have to know where to look. But it's really just a place where we can hang out, and the people who are interested in kind of, you know, the ACT in particular, can hang out and chat and coordinate, right? Because the intellectual property lobby, like, they do that. So, like, they go off and conspire in back rooms with politicians and shit like that. So why shouldn't we, right? Let's find some cool pictures. One of the cool things, and so, here we go. So most of the pictures people probably saw, right? So huge protests, huge protests. A lot of the pictures, right, I mean, you probably saw were anon. We can kind of talk about the relationship between anon and Telecomix here a little bit. One of the things that kind of came out of this was Telecomix also was the IRC channel host, at least, for what was something in Poland called Debata Acta, which means ACTA debate. And so Poland had all these protests and had them really early, and like lots of people, like lots and lots of people in the cold and showing up to protest against not only, I think, the restriction, you know, what the perceived censorship, but also the process. Like people just couldn't. I've talked to folks. People just couldn't believe that this treaty was going to pass. Like that, nobody knew about it, right? Like some of us might have known about it, but we're geeks and we care about like IP and intellectual property and copyright. But like just average folks in Europe who like, you know, showed up like all of these places in the like thousands. The outrage was not just like hands off my internet, but also I think frustration at the secrecy of the process. Just that this was about to pass and people had no idea. They had no, like, how the heck could that happen? Like, how could they go behind our back and do this? I think much similar with the austerity protests in Greece, where people just feel like their governments are kind of totally out of touch. One of the cool things that came out of this in Poland was this event called Debata Acta, which just means ACTA debate. But Poland, the Polish prime minister, like sat down with his country's internet, like on Twitter and Facebook and Google Plus and IRC, because they thought those other services weren't open enough. And for 7 hours had this debate. It was broadcast like on a live audience, like with the stuff projected up. It was broadcast on national TV for most of the day. 7 hours about ACTA and the future of the internet in Poland. Like, that's awesome. It's awesome. Just as an exercise in direct democracy or kind of participatory democracy of the sort that Occupy Wall Street, I think, is trying to do, or I think the model we try to run our hackerspaces on. Yeah, it's really, really cool. So what's actually coming out of this is that the Polish Prime Minister, I totally lost my tab. That's cool. Eventually backpedaled and sent a letter to all the other European heads of state, like the presidents and prime ministers, and urging them to reject this thing. And it is looking like it's going to die. There's an interesting question here of like, why did Europeans hit the streets over ACTA and Americans hit reload on Wikipedia over SOPA? Like, you remember that, right? Like all these high school kids, like after the blackout, like Twitter just lights up with like, what the fuck, Wikipedia? I can't do my homework. That's hitting people up. That's a complex and interesting question. Interestingly, nobody got tear gassed at the ACTA protests, and I think that says a lot about Europe. I don't know, how am I doing on time? Is there any questions? Can I take any questions? Comments? No? Okay. Yeah. Okay, we can talk about mesh networks. I think mesh networking is really cool. I think it's potentially a sort of interesting technology. Like, everybody's really hopped up on it right now because of the sort of centralization of our communications infrastructure. I don't know. I feel like, if the idea is like we run a mesh and everybody can share the internet, we could have it open and everybody can just it's free and it's cool. Like, I don't know, you go down and walk down the street, like certainly in San Francisco or New York, and I suspect parts of Cleveland too, there's just you can easily see a dozen, 20, 30 networks, and they're all locked. We can have an open internet today. We can have an open internet today if we wanted to. If people just unlocked their router and said okay, and there's obviously some technical complications like that, like somebody, hacksering your, Apple Music server or something like that. But really, we treat this as a scarce resource, both at the IP level. I don't know if people were around for the IPv4 talk before, in our hoarding of our Wi-Fi, and the spectrum too. These things are not scarce. I think mesh spectrum, mesh networks are a way to try to address that. I don't know. I think there needs to be work on the policy side as well, and that's been really hard. The FCC is auctioning off all of the old analog TV spectrum for 4G services. That's awesome prime spectrum. It goes through walls, it goes through glass, it goes through people, it doesn't brain cancer, it's really high bandwidth. And this natural resource, which isn't scarce at all, got sold off to AT&T and Verizon, where they're going to turn around and sell it back to us to provide shitty 4G service. Okay. That's not censorship in a strict sense, but I don't know, I think spectrum is speech. And they just freaking took it all away from us and sold it. Yeah. Sure. In my ideal world, it's ours to use. I think that there needs to be some way of sorting out people not stomping each other's toes, but for the only solution to just sell that off seems really inefficient. I'd like to be there more space for people to experiment. I'd like to be more space for people to hack and play around, not with just no ways of communicating over IP, but over some of the lower level modes, whether that's actual circuit bending or the dudes with the ham radios upstairs. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not enough of a Wi-Fi or spectrum geek to actually have a good technical answer. It just bothers me. Yeah, totally. Let me see if I can find. So my goal here in coming to give this talk is to sort of get people, like, one, because this stuff is cool, but also to get people inspired. Like, I go around and I do these talks, and I've like literally been all over the world, and it gets really tiring. And like, not because I'm looking for attention, like fuck credit, I don't care. Like, I do this stuff because I believe in it. And I go around and I talk about it because I'm looking to inspire people. Like, you know, just to think differently about free speech in a digital age, but also like what I'm hoping to do here at like a more technical level. And so if people are cool, I wouldn't mind going through some of just kind of the project ideas we've come across in the last like year and a half, see if people get excited about them. On the circuit bendy front, we came up during Egypt with a plan, what we called the AM/FM plan, was basically trying to build analog radios out of repurposed consumer electronics. People in the developing world are amazingly resourceful. I don't know if folks have seen some of the videos out of Libya where they like mounted, you know, like reclaimed like anti-aircraft guns on Power Wheels, and then used like with a remote control, or they like rigged a doorbell as a firing mechanism. People are remarkably resourceful in some of these places. And so we were trying to come up with how-tos, like another form of a care package, like leaving somebody a zip file with Tor or Firefox plugins, or like a fax care package, but like using kind of our time and our technical knowledge to come up with how-tos for people to build stuff on the ground with the equipment they already have. Like, Telecomix doesn't do ground ops. We don't plan protests. We don't do anything violent. Like, we don't ship hardware. Like, we don't do sat phones. Like, it's hard, it's expensive, you have to know how to send it to. So like, if what you want, you know, like, what can we build with what's already there? One of the things we came up with but didn't finish was building two-way radios, basically walkie-talkies out of repurposed consumer electronics. I don't even know how to solder. But apparently, if you take two like alarm clock radios and smash them open and cross like 3 wires, you have 1 unit of a walkie-talkie. And if you build a couple of these, you know, you can get maybe a mile, like 2-kilometer range, so like 1.5 miles, which if you're looking to organize in Tahrir Square, it's probably awesome, right? Yeah. Do you have it? Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah, exactly. Like, the use of old technology here, like, is just, you know, like, the internet is made of glue and popsicle sticks. It's not actually a bad thing, because that means when it breaks, like, we can go get some more glue and go get some more popsicle sticks and go fix it. You know, like, whether that's with modems or IRC or whatever. Okay, some more projects. Oh gosh, these are all too long. These things are all really boring, so visually. I'm actually not a huge fan of mesh nets for the developing world. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I hate the Freedom Box. I think that people with the Freedom Box, it's like a plug computer that can maybe take a monitor and a keyboard and does mesh networking, and you just plug it in. It's like $100, and it ships with Linux and all this awesome stuff. And it's kind of in the design phase, and it's going to solve like all the world's problems. Like, I'm glad like that's a development effort, but that's a very Western-oriented approach to solving these problems. Like, you know, your problem is you need secure communication or redundant, reliable internet, and so let's make a product. Let's make something else we can sell, like sell the developing world. Like, like I said, I'm a really, like for $100, like that's a lot of money, and even somewhere like Egypt, which is relatively wealthy. Like I said, I'm a really big fan of what's usually already there, and also sort of just throwing out what you don't need. Like, if you're trying to organize your city, you don't need the global internet. If you're trying to organize your neighborhood, you don't need the global internet. Like, you don't need Facebook, maybe even to organize your whole country. One of the ideas we came up with, and this was a project we called intranets. So basically using a combination of laptops and Wi-Fi routers, already there is nodes with Linux CDs, so nothing to flash, and running Usenet. Anybody remember Usenet? Usenet was like yeah, right? Usenet was like, huh? You run a Usenet. Oh, that's awesome. Usenet is like a store and forward forum. Think of like 4chan if you want. Yeah, like that easily supports anonymous posting and was designed for disconnected operation. Like back up in the day where you didn't have a full-time connection to the net and you had to dial into your local university server and get your news. Right? You would download like all of these messages on a bulletin board. Could we do something like that, in Syria? Could we do something like put a live CD distribution together and send people out wandering around with a laptop, connected, as an uplink to a Linksys node, and it's like your local Usenet delivery. Like you put a web gateway on it, and so grandma can just connect from her Windows PC and read some messages and post new ones, and just put this in a backpack and like send guys out wandering around. They don't even know who each other are, and the nodes just sync up. The nodes just sync up, and you just pass in the night your Usenet messages. We get coverage of Syria. Like, can we set up a local communications system for Homs, which is a city that's been regularly cut off? Like the DSLAMs are unplugged. So like the DSL lines, we can tell like one of the dudes has access to some router, and you can see that the DSL equipment's physically unplugged. So can we like leverage something locally to try to give those people just communication there and then kind of the outside world? Other cool projects to get people excited about, we have a project called Nmap All Things. Basically, we took about a dozen countries that are pretty well known to censor their internet and trying to replicate what we did in Syria. Like, just let's scan these entire networks and see if we can find some more. I'm out of time, huh? Okay. Yeah. Censorship, hardware, surveillance, hardware, stuff like that. I guess the point I want to wrap up here is there is so much stuff to be done here. Like, Telecomix is only like, I don't know, there's probably only like 300 people on the IRC at a given time. Like, a lot of it's really cool as a geek. A lot of it is really technical, if that's your thing. But a lot of it's really not technical, too. Like, this movement needs writers, and it needs artists, and it needs trolls. And it needs also groups besides us. Like, we got up to about 500 people during Egypt, and it almost broke us. Like, that's just too large. Like, we want people to go copy us. If you want to come and hang out and get some ideas and like work with us, that's awesome. And if you want to go home and start your own, Telecomix node, like, come talk to us first. But like, if you want to start your own cluster and you want to call it like helping puppies because puppies are cool, like whatever, like go do stuff. Go do stuff. I think for me at least, that is at most what it means to be a hacker. It's just, we don't just sit around and plan, we don't sit around and talk, we build things, we make things. And maybe we can do that to make a better world for ourselves and for people on the other side of the world. So yeah, thanks a lot.